May 27, 1941. The North Atlantic, roughly 400 miles west of Brest. 8:47 hours. A British battleship opens fire at 21,400 yards on the most powerful warship Germany has ever built. She is not the fastest ship in the Royal Navy. She is not even close. Her top speed is 23 knots, slower than almost every capital ship afloat in 1941. Her hull was starved of steel and horsepower 19 years earlier by a treaty her own government signed. Her 9 heaviest guns are crammed into 3 turrets, all of them forward of the bridge, a layout naval architects elsewhere considered a compromise, not a choice. 90 minutes later, every one of Bismarck's main guns has stopped firing. Her superstructure is a smoking ruin. Within 2 hours, she is sinking. The ship that broke her was the one the Admiralty had cut down to the bone to make treaty limits work. This is how HMS Rodney, built from a rule book instead of a blank sheet, outfought Hitler's newest battleship in under 2 hours. The story starts in 1922, not 1941. The Washington Naval Treaty had just ended the runaway battleship race between Britain, America, and Japan, capping new construction at 35,000 tons standard displacement. Britain wanted a ship carrying 16-inch guns, heavier than anything in the fleet, inside a hull nearly a third smaller than the battlecruiser designs it replaced. The director of naval construction, Eustace Tennyson Dancourt, gave his chief designer, Edward Atwood, a single instruction: to hold the ship to 35,000 tons, everything was to be cut to the minimum. Speed was cut first. Armor was concentrated only over the ship's vital spaces instead of spread along the hull. And to save the weight of a second armored citadel, all 3 main turrets, 9 16-inch guns, were placed forward of the bridge, a configuration no other Royal Navy battleship had used before or would use again. Rodney was laid down at Camel Laird on the 28th of December, 1922, launched in December 1925, commissioned in December 1927. Naval historians who studied her structure afterward, David K. Brown among them, concluded that in the search for weight savings, the hull itself was not built quite strong enough. She earned the nickname Rodney, and the class as a whole was mocked as the Cherry Tree class, cut down by Washington. By May 1941, nothing about Rodney looked like the ship that should end a crisis. She had spent 14 years as a byword for treaty compromise. Her machinery was worn from years of hard steaming with limited refits. When the order came, she was not hunting battleships. She was escorting a troop convoy out of Greenock, bound for Canada, making 19 knots in fair weather on the 23rd of May. The next day, the signal arrived that HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, had exploded and sunk in under 3 minutes under fire from Bismarck in the Denmark Strait. Only 3 men survived out of a crew of over 1,400. Rodney was ordered to drop the convoy and give chase. She now had to run down a ship nearly 7 knots faster than her on paper, a ship that had just destroyed Britain's most famous capital ship in a single engagement. Naval opinion at the Admiralty rated Bismarck's 15-inch guns, radar-directed fire control, and 30-knot speed as a combination no treaty-limited speed-starved British design should be able to match in a straight fight. Rodney was, by every specification that mattered on paper, the wrong ship for the job. What the specifications missed was what 9 guns crammed forward actually brought you. Every other battleship design split its main armament fore and aft, meaning in a head-on chase only half its guns could bear. Rodney's entire main battery, all 9 16-inch guns, could fire directly ahead or on nearly any forward bearing without a single turret being masked by her own superstructure. The weight saved by not building a second armoured citadel aft went instead into concentrated protection over the magazines, the machinery spaces and the turrets themselves, the all-or-nothing scheme the treaty had forced British designers to adopt rather than the belt and battery compromise of earlier ships. Each 16-inch Mark I gun fired a shell weighing over 2,048 pounds, heavier than any shell in Bismarck's magazines, had a design range exceeding 20 miles. The gun had a reputation for being troublesome in testing during the 1920s, but by 1941 the mounts and the fire control had been worked into a reliable system through 15 years of exercises the Royal Navy never stopped running. On the morning of the 27th, none of that showed on a specification sheet. It only showed once the guns opened up. If you're enjoying this look at how the Royal Navy turned treaty compromises into weapons, a quick subscribe helps the channel keep telling these stories properly. Bismarck had already been crippled the night before. Fairy Swordfish biplanes from HMS Ark Royal put a torpedo into her stern on the 26th of May, jamming her rudders hard over. She could no longer steer a course away from her pursuers, only circle helplessly into the wind at a few knots. At around 08:43 on the 27th, King George V sighted her at roughly 25,000 yards. Rodney sighted her a minute later. At 08:47, Rodney opened the engagement at 21,400 yards, the first British shell of the final battle. King George V joined seconds later. Bismarck, unable to maneuver but with her guns fully intact, straddled Rodney with return fire close enough to drench her bridge with spray from a shell landing some 60 feet away. Neither British ship was hit. By 09:02, British shells had struck Bismarck's forecastle and foremast, wrecking her forward rangefinder and blinding her fire control. Turrets Anton and Bruno were knocked out within the first hour and 20 minutes. A shell burst inside one of the barrels of turret Dora, destroying it from within. Turret Caesar kept firing alone until 09:31, when it too fell silent. In under 90 minutes, a ship built to a treaty budget with worn machinery and a mocked silhouette had reduced the newest, most modern battleship in the Kriegsmarine to a wreck that could no longer fire back. The numbers settled any argument the specifications had started. Across roughly 90 minutes, the 4 British warships engaged, Rodney, King George V, and the cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, fired close to 2,800 shells and scored around 400 hits. Rodney's main battery alone is credited with somewhere between 100 and 130 of them, the largest single share of any ship present. By the closing stages, Rodney had closed to what naval gunners call point-blank range for a battleship, only a few thousand yards, hammering a burning hull that could no longer answer. Dorsetshire finished Bismarck with torpedoes at 10:36. She rolled over and sank at 10:40, taking more than 2,000 of her crew down with her. The ship the Admiralty had starved of speed and steel in 1922 to satisfy an arms control treaty had just delivered more hits on Germany's newest battleship than any other vessel in the action. Rodney went on to serve through the Mediterranean landings and the D-Day bombardments, worked to exhaustion with almost no major refit for the rest of the war. By late 1945, she was in such poor condition from constant use that she was placed in reserve within months of victory in Europe. The ship that helped avenge Hood and end the Bismarck was not preserved. She was struck from the Navy list and sold for scrap in 1948, broken up without ceremony, the same fate as most of the fleet she had served in. Every decision that made Rodney look like a compromise on paper in 1922, the missing knots, the thinner scantlings, the guns crowded forward instead of split fore and aft, was a decision forced by a treaty designed to prevent exactly the kind of arms race that produced Bismarck in the first place. 19 years later, those same compromises put 9 16-inch guns on target from a bow-on chase angle no conventionally designed battleship could have matched, and put more shells into Bismarck's hull than any other ship that morning. Rodney was never built to be fast. She was built to hit as hard as a treaty would allow, from any angle she could bring her guns to bear. On the morning of the 27th of May, 1941, that was the only specification that mattered.